The art of war is not really about war. It never was. It is about conflict in its most universal form, the conflict between competing forces, competing interests, competing wills, and that conflict is everywhere. In boardrooms, in courtrooms, in negotiations, in relationships, in your own mind, when discipline fights desire and clarity fights fear. Sun Tzu wrote this text as a guide to supreme command, but the principles he articulated describe something far older and more fundamental, the nature of competition itself. How do intelligent forces prevail over stronger ones? How does the patient overcome the eager? How does preparation defeat raw power? These are not questions of the ancient world. They are the questions of every Tuesday morning when you sit down across from someone who wants something that conflicts with what you want. What we are about to explore together is not a manual for domination. It is a manual for clarity, for composure, for strategic intelligence that goes beyond aggression and beyond submission into something rarer and more powerful mastery. Let's begin. Chapter 1, Know Before You Move. Every major failure in conflict, in business, in life, can be traced back to the same root cause: someone moved before they understood. Sun Tzu opens with a truth that sounds simple until you sit with it. All warfare is based on calculation. Before you take a single step, you count, you measure, you compare. The side that does the most thorough accounting before the conflict begins almost always wins. And the side that acts on impulse, on emotion, on urgency, without information, that side almost always suffers. In the modern world, this translates to something we desperately undervalue: pre-work. The invisible labor that happens before the meeting, before the negotiation, before the confrontation. Most people walk into high-stakes situations trusting their instincts, their personality, their ability to improvise. And sometimes that works, but the strategic mind never relies on improvisation when preparation is available. Think about the last major decision you made. Did you truly understand the landscape? Did you know what the other party wanted, feared, needed? Did you know your own strengths and weaknesses with honesty? Or did you walk in hoping for the best, armored by confidence that masked uncertainty? Sun Tzu identified 5 factors that determine the outcome of any conflict: the moral alignment of your cause, the environmental conditions, the terrain you're operating in, the quality of your leadership, and the discipline of your organization. These 5 factors, properly assessed, tell you almost everything you need to know before you act. The lesson is not to become paralyzed by analysis. The lesson is that real boldness, genuine, effective boldness, is the product of knowledge, not the absence of it. The truly confident person in the room is not the one who knows least and feels most certain. It is the one who has done the work that others haven't and moves with the quiet authority that preparation produces. Don't mistake noise for strength. Measure before you move. Chapter 2, The Cost of Prolonged Conflict. There is a temptation, when we are strong and confident, to believe that a long fight is winnable. That endurance alone will carry us through. That if we simply refuse to give up, we will eventually prevail. Sun Tzu would caution you strongly against this belief. He understood something about prolonged conflict that most people learn to. Late wars of attrition bleed the victor as surely as they bleed the vanquished. The longer a conflict continues, the more resources are consumed, the more morale degrades, the more opportunities are missed. A battle that could have been resolved in a week, stretched across a year, does not just cost time, it costs spirit. In modern terms, think about the emotional and cognitive cost of unresolved conflicts, the business dispute that drags through courts for years, the workplace rivalry that consumes your mental bandwidth every single day, the personal relationship in a state of permanent Cold War. Each of these represents not just a conflict you're enduring, they represent an enormous invisible tax on everything else you're trying to build. The strategic mind is always looking for the shortest viable path to resolution, not the fastest reckless path, but the shortest wise one. Like, this sometimes means making a concession that feels uncomfortable because it ends the conflict cleanly.
Yeah.
It sometimes means delivering a decisive blow when the opportunity presents itself rather than prolonging the engagement. It sometimes means walking away from a battle that, even if won, would cost more than winning is worth. This requires a kind of ruthless accounting that our egos often resist. The ego wants to fight every battle to the finish. The ego wants credit for endurance. The ego wants to be seen fighting. Strategy doesn't care about being seen. Strategy cares about the outcome. Ask yourself honestly, is there a prolonged conflict in your life right now that you're continuing, not because winning is likely or worth it, but because stopping feels like surrender? Sometimes the most powerful move is the one that ends the game entirely. Chapter 3, The Supreme Art: Winning Without Fighting. Here is the idea that separates Sun Tzu from every other military thinker who has ever existed. The greatest victory is the one achieved without battle. This is not pacifism. This is not weakness. This is the recognition that fighting is expensive in every currency imaginable, and that the highest form of skill is making the fight unnecessary. The truly superior strategist doesn't defeat the enemy. They make the enemy conclude that resistance is futile, or that cooperation is more advantageous, or that the conflict itself was misguided. Think about how this principle operates in the real world. The most effective negotiators rarely go into a room looking for a fight. They go in having already created a situation where their counterpart has strong incentives to reach an agreement. The terms were shaped before the conversation began. The leverage was constructed quietly, over time, out of sight. By the time both parties sit down, the outcome is already largely determined. The most effective leaders don't manage their teams through constant conflict and correction. They build cultures, systems, and incentives that make the right behavior natural. They shape the environment so that people want to do what needs to be done. The battle for compliance never has to happen because it was made unnecessary by design. In your own life, think about the conflicts you've avoided, not through running from them, but through building enough authority, enough trust, enough demonstrated competence that others simply don't challenge you in those domains. That is Sun Tzu's supreme art made personal. The question to ask is always, what would have to be true for this conflict to become unnecessary? How can I shape the situation so that resistance dissolves before it forms? That kind of thinking, patient, structural, far-sighted, is the hallmark of the genuinely powerful. Chapter 4, Invincibility and Opportunity. There is a distinction that most people never make, and it costs them enormously. The difference between making yourself undefeatable and creating the conditions for victory. Sun Tzu teaches that invincibility, the state in which you cannot be defeated, is something you build through your own discipline, your own preparation, your own structure. This part is entirely within your control. But victory, the moment when opportunity materializes and you can strike decisively, that is not something you manufacture. That is something you recognize and seize. The practical implication of this is profound. Most people have it backwards. They spend enormous energy trying to manufacture opportunities while neglecting the foundation that would allow them to capitalize on opportunities when they naturally arise. They hustle frantically outward while quietly crumbling inward. Their strategy is all offense and no defense, all ambition and no infrastructure. The strategic mind builds the house first, consolidates the foundation, establishes the systems, the skills, the relationships, the resources that constitute genuine strength. And then, with that foundation secure, it watches, patiently, for the moment when the environment shifts, when the opponent overextends, when the window opens. In practice, this looks like the person who spends years building genuine expertise in their field while the room fills with people talking about what they're going to do. And then, when the perfect opportunity arrives, the right project, the right partnership, the right moment, they move decisively because they were ready. The opportunity didn't create their success. Their preparation made them capable of seizing it. Defense first, then opportunity, in that order, always. Chapter 5, Energy, Momentum, and the Decisive Moment. Have you ever watched a person operate at the absolute peak of their capacity, where everything they do seems effortless, connected, inevitable. Athletes call it being in the zone. Strategists call it controlling the energy of the engagement. Sun Tzu describes two kinds of force: the orthodox and the unorthodox, the predictable and the unexpected, the conventional and the creative. The orthodox establishes contact, creates structure, occupies the opponent's attention. The unorthodox delivers the decisive blow from a direction no one anticipated. The genius of this principle is that it describes how all great performances are structured. In music, the establishment of a theme followed by the unexpected variation that takes your breath away. In business, the steady execution of a reliable service followed by the innovation that suddenly makes competitors irrelevant. In conversation, the measured, rational argument followed by the single, perfectly chosen observation that shifts everything. There is also the concept of momentum, the sense that a force in motion carries something beyond its physical properties. An army that has won 3 battles carries a psychological weight into the 4th that has nothing to do with the number of soldiers. A negotiator who has successfully resolved every point of contention up to the final one carries credibility that is worth more than any single argument. Momentum is real, it accumulates, and the strategic mind knows to protect it, feed it, and use it at the critical moment rather than squander it on inconsequential engagements. Choose your battles with this in mind. Not every hill is worth dying on, but the hills that matter, the ones where your momentum and your preparation converge with genuine opportunity, those hills you take with everything you have. Chapter 6, Emptiness and Fullness. There is a principle in Sun Tzu that is almost Taoist. In its elegance, water shapes itself around obstacles. It never fights the rock. It finds the empty space and flows through it. This is the principle of emptiness and fullness, the idea that strength should never be directed against strength, that the wise force always seeks the weakness, the gap, the opening, and that creating those openings is as important as exploiting them. In competitive environments, this translates to a deceptively simple idea: do not compete where your opponent is strongest. Find where they are thinnest, where they are unprepared, where they have not thought to look, and bring all of your concentration to bear there. Companies that have disrupted enormous industries rarely did so by attacking those industries head-on with superior resources. They couldn't. The incumbents had more money, more distribution, more brand recognition. Instead, they found the gap. The customer the incumbent ignored. The use case the existing product handled poorly. The price point that the established market had decided wasn't worth serving. On a personal level, this principle applies to how you invest your energy. The person who tries to be excellent at everything typically becomes excellent at nothing. The person who identifies the specific domain where their particular combination of strengths meets an underserved need and concentrates there relentlessly creates something that is genuinely difficult to compete with. Where are you concentrated? And where are you spread so thin that a determined opponent could find easy passage? These are questions worth sitting with, because the answers reveal both your vulnerabilities and your opportunities with equal clarity. Chapter 7, Maneuvering and Deception. All strategy involves maneuvering, the movement of resources, attention, and intention into positions of advantage, and Sun Tzu is notably direct about the role of deception in this process. When you are strong, appear weak. When you are weak, appear strong. When you are near, appear far. When you are far, appear near. Before we talk about how this applies in modern life, let's acknowledge what it is not. It is not an instruction to be dishonest in your dealings with people who trust you. It is not a guide to betraying partners, deceiving friends, or manipulating the vulnerable. Applied at that level, it destroys the very relationships and reputation that make long-term success possible. What it is an acknowledgement that perception management is a real and legitimate component of any competitive engagement. In a negotiation, revealing the full extent of your desire for an outcome before an agreement is reached weakens your position. In a competitive landscape, broadcasting your strategy in advance invites countermeasures. In any form of competition, allowing your opponent to know exactly what you're going to do next eliminates the element of surprise that often delivers the decisive advantage. The most sophisticated practitioners of this principle don't lie. They shape attention. They make their preparations quietly. They let opponents focus on the wrong variables. They create impressions not through false statements, but through selective emphasis, through what they show and what they withhold, through the timing of their reveals. The practical takeaway: guard your intentions carefully in competitive contexts. Develop the discipline to not announce your next move before it's made. There is power in silence. There is power in the gap between what others assume about you and what you're actually building. Chapter 8. The 9 variables rigidity kills strategies. Not bad ones. All of them. Eventually. Sun Tzu dedicates considerable thought to the idea that effective commanders must be able to adapt to changing circumstances, that the tactical principles which lead to victory in one situation can lead to catastrophic failure if applied mechanically in a different situation. He identifies a series of terrain types, physical environments that require different responses from a commander. But the real insight is not topographical. It is psychological. The message is this: the world does not conform to your playbook. The map is not the territory. The plan that looked perfect in the planning room will encounter reality, and reality will not apologize for not cooperating. The most dangerous failure mode for intelligent, successful people is what we might call the success trap. The tendency to continue applying strategies that worked in the past, even when circumstances have fundamentally changed. The executive who built their career in a slow-moving industry, applying the same methodologies in a fast-moving one. The entrepreneur who succeeded with one business model, trying to replicate it in a market with completely different dynamics. The advantage in any competitive environment eventually accrues to the party that can read changing conditions and adapt faster. Not the party with the best plan, the party with the best ability to update the plan when the plan meets reality. This requires a kind of intellectual humility that is genuinely difficult to maintain after a significant track record of success. The discipline to say what worked before is not sacred. What matters is what's true now and what will work next. Be wedded to outcomes, not methods, principles, not tactics. That flexibility, that willingness to let go of what no longer serves, is one of the deepest forms of strategic intelligence. Chapter 9. Reading the field. The general who wins reads his environment like language. Every element of the landscape carries information. Every movement of the opponent is a sentence in a text that, if read correctly, reveals intention, capacity, fear, and plan. Sun Tzu dedicates extraordinary attention to the art of observation. Not passive observation, but the active, intelligent reading of signs. The way troops are positioned. The behavior of animals in a territory that an army is moving through. The psychological state of soldiers based on subtle behavioral cues. He treats the environment as an information system that is constantly broadcasting to those trained to receive it. In modern context, the parallel is the ability to read a room, but at a much deeper level than surface social awareness. It's the negotiator who notices that the other side has started repeating their opening position word for word, which often signals they're losing confidence in it. It's the leader who notices that their top performer has stopped offering ideas in meetings and understands that silence as a warning signal before the resignation arrives. It's the investor who notices that a company's management team has stopped talking about a particular metric in their earnings calls and correctly reads that omission as significant. Most people receive the signals but don't process them. Their attention is absorbed by the surface of events, the words being said, the immediate action taking place, and they miss the deeper current of information that runs beneath. Developing this capacity requires training your attention. It requires the practice of stepping back from your own reactions and asking what is actually being communicated here, beyond the explicit content. What does the behavior, not just the words, tell me? What are the silences saying? The most dangerous person in any negotiation is not the most aggressive. It is the one who understands what's actually happening. Chapter 10, Leadership and Command. At the heart of all of Sun Tzu's teaching on strategy is a question about leadership, specifically about what separates commanders who produce victory from those who produce defeat. He identifies 5 qualities of the effective commander: wisdom, integrity, compassion, courage, and discipline. Notice what is absent from this list. Aggression is not on it, dominance is not on it, neither is brilliance, charisma, or ruthlessness. The qualities Sun Tzu elevates are quieter and in many ways harder to develop. The wisdom, the ability to see clearly and decide well, not cleverness, not intelligence for its own sake, but the practical judgment that comes from genuine understanding of both people and situations. Integrity, which Sun Tzu frames not as moral virtue in the abstract, but as reliability. The effective leader does what they say they will do. Their people can predict them, and that predictability paradoxically makes the leader more powerful, because it builds the deep trust that motivates people to follow when following is hard. And compassion, the genuine concern for the welfare of those you lead. Sun Tzu is emphatic that soldiers who feel genuinely cared for will follow a commander into impossible situations. Those who feel like instruments to be used will defect, underperform, or collapse at the critical moment. Courage, not recklessness, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act decisively in the face of genuine uncertainty, and equally the courage to not act when action would be premature. Discipline, the structure that transforms individual talent into collective force. Without discipline, the wisest strategy, executed by talented people, produces chaos. Together, these 5 qualities describe not just military leadership, they describe the kind of person you become when you commit to genuine mastery of yourself. That process, that long, difficult, rewarding work of developing wisdom, integrity, compassion, courage, and discipline, that is what makes any person genuinely formidable. Chapter 11, The Psychology of Commitment. There is a moment in certain conflicts when a commander makes a decision that changes everything, not through a tactical maneuver, but through a psychological one. Sun Tzu describes the concept of placing soldiers on what he calls death ground, a position from which retreat is impossible. When people cannot retreat, something changes inside them. The psychological energy that was partially reserved for the possibility of escape is suddenly fully committed to forward movement. Historically, armies fighting with their backs to the water, with no possibility of withdrawal, have consistently performed beyond what their numbers or training would predict. The psychological mechanism here is not mysterious. Optionality, the presence of a backup plan, is comfortable, but it also drains commitment. When we know we can leave, part of us is always preparing to leave. When that option disappears, something essential is released. In modern life, this principle appears in the stories of people who made dramatic, seemingly reckless decisions to fully commit to a path, who burned the bridges back to their previous life, and then performed at levels they could not have predicted. Not because recklessness is wise, but because the act of full commitment unlocks resources that partial commitment keeps locked. This is not a recommendation to make irresponsible decisions. It is an invitation to examine honestly the degree to which your own optionality is serving as a comfortable reason not to fully commit to anything. Because there is a cost to always keeping one foot out the door. You never find out what you're truly capable of when you're always managing your exits. What would you attempt if retreat were genuinely not an option? That question reveals something important about where your real potential lies. Chapter 12, Intelligence and the Knowledge Advantage. Sun Tzu ends his text with something that, in context, is almost shocking. An extended treatment of espionage and intelligence gathering, not as a morally questionable appendix, but as the culminating principle of everything that came before. His argument is devastating in its logic. Every calculation, every positioning decision, every tactical maneuver we have discussed, all of it depends on accurate information. And the most valuable information is what your opponent doesn't know you have. He identifies 5 types of intelligence sources and insists that the enlightened sovereign, the effective leader, values intelligence above all other expenditures. Not because knowledge is theoretically valuable, but because in a conflict between 2 evenly matched forces, the side with superior information wins. Consistently, the information advantage is a force multiplier unlike any other. And the modern world, this principle has expanded into something almost infinite. The amount of information available about competitors, markets, environments, and human behavior is staggering. The gap between organizations that systematically gather, process, and act on intelligence and those that operate on assumption and instinct has never been larger. On a personal level, this principle translates into the discipline of genuine research before significant decisions, not browsing, not confirming what you already believe. Real inquiry, seeking information that challenges your assumptions, that reveals what you don't know, that shows you the situation as it is, rather than as you'd prefer it to be. The person who understands the terrain better than anyone else in the room holds a form of power that no amount of personality or aggression can overcome. Be that person. Know more, understand more, see more clearly. That quiet, thorough, relentless pursuit of accurate knowledge is one of the most powerful competitive advantages available to anyone willing to develop it. Chapter 13, Know Yourself. We have covered intelligence about the external world, the terrain, the opponent, the conditions. But Sun Tzu's most famous observation is about a different kind of knowledge entirely. Know your enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles you will never be in danger. Know yourself but not your enemy, and for every victory gained you will also suffer defeat. Know neither the enemy nor yourself, and you will succumb in every battle. The sequence here is significant. Most people, when they think about competitive failure, think about the external variable. The opponent who was stronger, the market that was unfavorable, the circumstances that were unkind. And sometimes that is true. But the deeper pattern in most failures is not external. It is internal. The leader who didn't recognize their own blind spots. The entrepreneur who overestimated their own resilience under pressure. The negotiator who didn't understand how their own emotional state was compromising their judgment. Self-knowledge is the rarest and most valuable form of intelligence because it is the hardest to obtain honestly. The ego is a persistent and creative distorter of self-perception. It inflates strengths and minimizes weaknesses. It attributes failures to bad luck and successes to personal virtue. It shows us a version of ourselves that is comfortable rather than accurate. Developing genuine self-knowledge requires the willingness to receive feedback that is uncomfortable, to examine patterns in your own behavior that don't flatter you, to sit with uncertainty about your own capacities rather than defaulting to either arrogance or false modesty. But the reward for that difficult, honest work is immense. The person who genuinely knows themselves, who understands their actual strengths, their real limitations, their emotional triggers, their characteristic errors, that person can compensate for their weaknesses, deploy their strengths with precision, and navigate challenges with a clarity that people who don't know themselves can never achieve. The deepest strategy begins here, in the mirror. The quiet mind at war. We have traveled through 13 chapters of an ancient mind thinking about a very modern problem. How does an intelligent, self-aware person navigate a world full of conflict, competition, and uncertainty without losing themselves and without losing? What emerges from Sun Tzu, taken as a whole, is not a cynical view of the world. It is a clear one. Yes, conflict exists. Yes, competition is real. Yes, there will be moments when you must fight, genuinely, fully, without hesitation. But those moments are fewer than you think, and the preparation for them is more important than the fighting itself. The deepest message is this: the person who works hardest on themselves, who builds genuine competence, genuine character, genuine self-knowledge, that person moves through the world differently, not because they have eliminated conflict from their life, but because they have built the internal foundation from which all genuine strategy flows. You cannot truly know the terrain until you know how your own perception distorts it. You cannot truly assess an opponent until you have honestly assessed yourself. You cannot lead others effectively until you have learned to command your own reactions, your own fears, your own impulses. This is why a 2,000-year-old text about military strategy is still being read in business schools and boardrooms and championship locker rooms, because it is not really about armies, it is about the universal structure of intelligent action under conditions of uncertainty and opposition. That structure applies anywhere, to anyone, including you, especially you. Take what you've heard tonight and sit with it. Not the tactics, those are context dependent and will change. Sit with the principles, the value of thorough preparation, the cost of prolonged conflict, the power of positioning over reacting, the supreme importance of self-knowledge, the discipline of knowing when to strike and when to wait. These are not ancient ideas, they are timeless ones. And in a world that grows more competitive, more complex, and more demanding by the year, those who carry this kind of strategic clarity within them will find it is the most practical and powerful asset they possess. Move with purpose, see with clarity, know yourself, win before the battle begins. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the Book Sanctuary and let the world of words inspire your soul.